All right, so hi everyone. My name is Matthew Fayisa. If you don't know me, I'm a third year going on to fourth year medical student. I've got my good friend here, Wahil. He's a physiotherapist. He went to King's like me, and we're just going to have a discussion about a few topics. Firstly, we're going to see what he does as a physio, and then we're going to talk about med school and how it compares to physiotherapy, and finally, we're going to talk about coronavirus and the impact of it on football. So, Wahil, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yep, absolutely. So yeah, as you said, I'm Wahil. I just finished my final year at King's for physiotherapy. In terms of what I've been doing in terms of footballing wise, that might be relevant to this video. During my second year as a physio student, I did pitch side first aid for King Sports. So at the university matches, I would cover any injuries, anything like that. This was for sports like rugby, football, hockey, anything that the university had. And in the past year, so in my final year of physiotherapy at King's, I've been working at Brentford Football Club, which is a professional club. I've been as a pitch side first aider because I was still a student. But for next year, I'll be the full-time physio and the only medical staff on the team. Next year, I'll also be working as a qualified physiotherapist, a musculoskeletal physiotherapist at a clinic in London that's half NHS, half private, and it's the biggest provider of MSK physio in England. So I'll be working there next year as well as the clubs. So yeah, that's me.
It's quite jam packed.
Yeah, quite a lot.
It's a lot more than what I'll be doing. I'm just going to be at uni. So you're doing quite a lot next year.
Mm-hmm.
So the two jobs you said you had was the Brentford Football Club and the MSK. So if we talk about Brentford, so
Yep.
can you talk about a little bit about what you do there from last year to in comparison to now?
Yeah, I mean, as a student, obviously, and at a semi-professional club, it isn't, full time. But essentially, my role was number one on match days. It was about being there during match days for any injuries that might happen, any sort of preparation for the games, checking up on players, just being there as a physio. But I'd also have one or two clinics a week where it depends on the number of injuries, but at the clubhouse itself, I'd have a room to myself where if anyone was injured, they can come in and I'd have a half an hour or a 1 hour session with them where I'd analyze what they had, and, prepare any rehabilitation for them. For the upcoming weeks, talking to them about returning to play, giving them a lot of advice, and explaining to them what has happened to them, depending on the injury. But yeah, I do that once or twice a week alongside match days whilst being a student, and hopefully next year will be similar, but as a qualified physio, I could, I have a lot more knowledge, and I can change I can control how the medical department at the club is because I'll be given a lot more responsibility to change things. So it'll be, yeah.
Yeah, that's I trust you. You've got a lot of responsibility for next year, but I think you'll be fine. In terms of, because obviously you started the first aider role in your last year of physiotherapy. How were you in terms of managing time?
It is a challenge, it did take quite a lot of time, and as a final year student, you definitely don't have a lack of work. You never have a lack of work. So it was quite, so it can be quite daunting because usually matches at this level are at night time on a Saturday or a Friday or at night on Fridays or midday on Saturdays. So it would take a lot of free time that could be used to study, but I found it extremely enjoyable, so it didn't really feel like work. But yeah, it was just about organizing, my time effectively, as most students have to do anyway with work and studying.
Yeah, I think I really enjoy physiotherapy in terms of like the sports side of it, especially. I remember like when I was applying for med school, they always say put biomed as your second option. I did, but in my heart of hearts, I don't think I would ever have done it. Like it would have been physio because of like the practical skills that you get.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I feel like biomed is more research orientated rather than physio, which is either in the field or in the field in the NHS.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's all about personal preference. Some people really enjoy, you know, the research aspect of it,
Yeah.
the science. I personally was just a big sports fan, and you know, I did well in science, and I enjoyed, you know, that interaction with people, and you know, so having physio as a job, you know, whether it's at a club or at a clinic where dealing with, you know, muscle injuries, you know, different types of injuries, you know, that was right for me. But you know, everyone has to ask themselves, what
Yeah.
do they want to do? And yeah.
In terms of, obviously, as a first aider and next year as a like fully qualified physio, you have quite a few examinations to do. What's the typical examinations you do when a player's injured?
So yeah, so there's so many examinations that you can do, but it really depends on what the type of injury that they have. You know, just to break it down, you know, you can have upper limb injuries, you can have lower limb injuries, and each joint has general examinations that you have to do. So that would be, you know, the range of motion. Well, first of all, you'd observe the joint itself, you know, for any swelling, any redness, you know, you can feel it compared to the other leg for any heat. Other things that are important are, you know, the strength of the strength, and grade it yourself based on your feel, using the Oxford scale. Um, you look at functional movements themselves, you know, if they're able to do a squat, you know, and for football, it's, you know, it's whatever the person wants to do. So if it's in football, you look at football movements or whether they're able to do it. But every single joint has a lot of special tests, which I can't go through in this video,
Oh yeah,
but
obviously,
there's
yeah.
numerous, you know, because every single joint has so many different diagnoses, you know, the main part of being a physio is deciding the differential diagnosis through these tests, because, you know, you can have an ACL, MCL, LCL, there's so many CLs, it drives you crazy. But you know, it could be a meniscus tear, but you know, that's the skill that you gain through studying, is how to differentiate these tests. And sometimes, you know, you aren't able to do them on your own. You have to have an MRI when it's, you know, things like an MRI or an X-ray when it's a bit too specific, like a bucket handle medial meniscus lesion. You know, you can't diagnose that yourself. You need an MRI to confirm it. But yeah, essentially, it's a lot of tests and special tests just to problem solve and, you know, eliminate other conditions, and, you know, narrow it down to one thing that you think, you know what, from my problem solving, I think this is what you have, and this is how we're gonna tackle it and treat it.
That brings me on to my next question, because obviously, especially at the non-league, you're quite limited in terms of the medical equipment you have. So how would you go about organizing an MRI or an X-ray?
So yeah, so it can be quite difficult. I mean, in terms, fortunately, at my club, you know, I do have quite a lot of space to deal with, and you know, in terms of facilities, you know, I have some of my own, but obviously the more expensive stuff you can't have on your own. So essentially, when you're at a club of that size, what you would do is, if you think it will be triaging. So when you see a player, if you think they have something a bit more serious, or like, for example, if you have a positive ACL, you know, you or something a bit more serious, you might ask them to go to their GP and get a referral. Or if next year, as an actual physio, I might be able to recommend those referrals myself.
Oh yeah, that could work.
Yeah, so that's essentially what the clinic is for. But things that I can do on my own is, you know, give them a timeline. If it's something that can be rehabilitated without extra things like injections or, you know, scans, then I could start the rehab immediately and work with them either at the club or, you know, with the coronavirus and everything, you know, either through Zoom or any necessary actions like that. Yeah.
Because I remember about a year or two ago, because obviously we have GP placement. I remember a rugby player came in with an ACL injury, and we hadn't had like proper teaching on it. But I remember, you know Derek Rose, the NBA player, and I remember he had an ACL tear. I think when they're trying to jump, and then I remember the reporter saying that he heard a snap and a pop, and I remember asking the rugby player, I was like, "Did you hear this?" Not knowing it was correlated, and they were like, "Yeah," and that was like kind of not the main thing, that helped diagnose it, but obviously it was one of the contributing factors that the doctor was able to use. Like
Hmm.
me just saying randomly, did you hear a snap or a pop? It's like
Yeah.
just something as simple as that. So I think, you know, definitely having a vested interest in sports helps you, especially with
Hmm.
injuries.